The war ended on a quiet morning. No explosions, no screaming artillery, no last heroic charge, just silence. The announcement came through a crackling radio, its weak voice echoing through a half-destroyed farmhouse where he sat, alone on an ammunition crate. Germany had surrendered. The fighting was over. Men around him froze, not cheering, not crying, just staring at the ground as if the earth itself had spoken. He felt nothing. That scared him more than the war ever had. For years, his life had been simple in the most brutal way. Survive the day. Survive the night, repeat. Fear had direction. Pain had purpose. Orders told him where to stand, where to run, when to shoot, when to hide. Now there were no orders. Someone clapped him on the shoulder. "It's over," the man said, smiling weakly. He nodded because that's what you do when words don't come. But inside, something whispered, "No, it isn't." They were sent home weeks later. The train ride back felt unreal. Villages passed by, burned, silent, broken. Children stood near the tracks watching the soldiers like ghosts watching other ghosts. Some waved, some didn't. He avoided their eyes. His uniform hung loosely on his body. He had lost weight, lost years, lost pieces of himself he couldn't name. The man reflected in the train window looked older than his age, his eyes dull like used metal. When the train stopped at his station, no band played. No crowd waited, just his wife. She stood there holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, her hands shaking as if she wasn't sure he was real. When their eyes met, she smiled, and then cried at the same time. He didn't know how to respond. When she hugged him, his body went rigid for half a second before he forced himself to relax. Her arms felt fragile, too gentle, too unfamiliar. "This is home," she whispered. He nodded again, but home felt loud. The house hadn't changed much. Same wooden table, same clock ticking on the wall, same window where sunlight fell every afternoon. Everything was exactly as he remembered, yet completely wrong. The walls felt too close. At dinner, he barely touched his food. Every sound, the scrape of a fork, the clink of a glass, made him tense. He kept scanning the corners of the room without realizing it. His wife noticed. "You're safe now," she said softly. Safe. The word didn't fit. That night, he stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long time before entering. The bed looked impossibly clean. He sat on the edge, boots still on, afraid that if he lay down, something would catch him unaware. When he finally removed his boots, his hands trembled. He lay beside his wife, staring into the darkness. No shells fell. No alarms sounded. No one shouted his name. Yet his heart beat like it was waiting for permission to stop. As he closed his eyes, one thought repeated again and again. "I survived the war. But what if the war didn't survive me?" Outside, the clock kept ticking. The war was over, and his real battle was about to begin. The war had ended. That's what the newspapers said. That's what the radio repeated every morning. But for him, the war had simply changed its shape. The first night back home, he slept in a real bed for the first time in years. Clean sheets, a roof that didn't shake, walls that didn't bleed dust. His wife lay beside him, breathing softly, relieved, believing the worst was over. He closed his eyes, and immediately the silence broke. Not with explosions, not with gunfire, with memory. His body stiffened as if expecting impact. Sweat formed along his spine. His jaw locked. In his mind, the ceiling above him wasn't wood anymore. It was a collapsing bunker roof, pressing down inch by inch. He tried to breathe. The smell came first. Not the soap on the sheets, not the fresh air from the open window, but mud, smoke, burnt oil, blood that had dried too long to be washed away. His eyes snapped open. The room was dark, calm, safe, yet his heart was racing as if he were still running. He didn't scream. He never screamed. Screaming was for men who still believed someone would come. Instead, he stared at the ceiling until morning. The nightmares didn't arrive loudly. They crept in. Sometimes he dreamed of faces. Men he once knew, now frozen in the exact moment before death. They didn't speak. They just looked at him, as if asking a question he refused to answer. Other nights, there were no faces at all, just footsteps behind him, always behind. He would wake up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, his hands grasping empty air, his chest tight like it was wrapped in wire. His wife tried to help. She would gently touch his arm when he stopped breathing in his sleep. Every time she did, he flinched. Sometimes, violently. Sometimes with a fear so raw it made her pull her hand back in shock. "I'm sorry," he whispered once, though he didn't know why. He stopped sleeping next to her after that. During the day, people expected smiles. Neighbors shook his hand. Shopkeepers called him a hero. Strangers thanked him for his service. Every word felt heavy. They spoke of peace like it was a gift, but peace felt like exposure. In war, fear made sense. In peace, fear had no place to hide. A car backfired in the street once. He dropped to the ground before he realized what he was doing. Hands over his head, breath gone. The world narrowed to survival instinct. People stared. Someone laughed nervously. He stood up slowly, dust on his coat, shame burning hotter than any battlefield wound. That night, the nightmares came back stronger. This time, he didn't sleep at all. He sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at nothing, listening to the ticking clock. Each second, a reminder that time was moving forward without him. The war was over, but inside his head, it was still 1943, and it showed no sign of ending. The first job didn't last long. It was a factory near the edge of town, rebuilding engines that would never go to war. The machines were loud, rhythmic, predictable. Everyone said it was good work for men like him. Honest work, safe work. On his third day, a steel plate slipped from a conveyor belt. It hit the floor with a sharp metallic crack. He didn't think. He reacted. He was on the ground before the sound finished echoing, hands over his head, breath tearing out of his chest as if someone had punched the air from his lungs. His heart raced like it was being chased. His ears rang, not with factory noise, but with artillery that wasn't there. Someone shouted his name. Another man laughed nervously. "Relax, it's just noise." Just noise. When he finally stood up, every eye in the factory was on him. Not hostile, not kind, uncomfortable. The foreman pulled him aside later, spoke gently, too gently. "Maybe you're not ready yet," he said. "Go home, rest, rest." The word followed him all the way back through the streets. At home, the days began to stretch. Morning came. Evening followed. Nothing filled the space between them. He tried to help, fixing a chair, repairing the fence. But every small task took enormous effort. His hands shook. His thoughts wandered. Sometimes he would stop mid-action, staring at nothing, trapped in a memory that had no beginning and no end. His wife watched him from doorways. At first, she asked questions. Then she offered reassurance. Then she fell silent. They spoke less each day. Not because of anger, but because neither of them knew how to speak anymore. At night, he slept lightly, if at all. Any sudden sound dragged him awake. Sweat soaked the sheets. His breath came short and fast, like he had been running from something invisible. Sometimes he woke up shouting names no one in the room recognized. One afternoon, he went into town. People filled the streets. Shopkeepers, children, couples laughing as if laughter hadn't been illegal only months ago. The world was moving forward, fast and confident, while he stood still, unsure where to place his feet. A group of men his age stood outside a cafe, smoking. "War's over," one of them said. "Time to live again." They noticed him then. Someone nodded at his posture, his distant eyes. "You were at the front, weren't you?" He hesitated, then nodded. The questions came quickly. "Where were you stationed? Did you see real combat? Was it as bad as they say?" Their faces leaned closer. Not cruel, just curious. Hungry for stories that would make their peaceful lives feel meaningful. His chest tightened. He tried to answer, but the words tangled. How do you explain nights that never ended? Friends who vanished between one heartbeat and the next? The way death stopped being shocking and started being routine. He said nothing. The silence made them uncomfortable. One man cleared his throat. Another looked away. "Well, good that you're back," someone muttered. He walked away before they could ask more. From that day on, he avoided crowds. His wife suggested church. "Maybe it will help," she said carefully. The church was full. Candles flickered. Hymns rose toward a ceiling untouched by bombs. People prayed for peace, for gratitude, for the future. He sat stiffly on the wooden bench. The priest spoke about forgiveness, about leaving the past behind. Each word felt like an accusation. When everyone stood to sing, he remained seated, staring at his hands. He wondered how many of them had ever held a dying man. How many had watched someone bleed out while whispering for their mother. He left before the service ended. Outside, his legs gave way. He sat on the church steps, breathing hard, head in his hands. This was peace, and it was suffocating him. That evening, his wife finally spoke the truth neither of them wanted to hear. "You're here," she said quietly, "but you're not with me." He wanted to deny it. He wanted to tell her that he loved her, that he was trying, that something inside him was broken and he didn't know how to fix it. Instead, he said nothing. She nodded, eyes wet but tired. "I miss you," she whispered, "even though you're sitting right in front of me." That night, he slept on the chair by the window. Outside, the town was peaceful. Inside, the war tightened its grip. He had survived bullets, hunger, cold, and fear. But now he understood something terrifying. The war had not ended for him. It had only changed its shape. "At least now the worst is behind us, eh?" The words hit harder than any blow. He dropped his side instantly. The object crashed to the ground. "The worst?" he said quietly. The neighbor laughed awkwardly. "I mean, the war's over." He looked at the man, really looked at him. Clean hands, unbroken eyes, no shadows behind the smile. "Not for everyone," he said. The neighbor didn't reply. Neither of them knew what else to say. That night, his wife cried quietly in the bedroom. He sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the table. The anger finally broke, not into violence, into exhaustion. His shoulders slumped. His hands trembled. Tears came without warning, sliding down a face that had learned long ago not to show weakness. "I don't know how to live here," he whispered to no one. The war had taught him how to survive, but no one had taught him how to come home. The breaking point didn't come during a nightmare. It came on an ordinary morning. The sun rose gently, as if the world was trying to prove it was normal again. Birds sang. The street outside was quiet, too quiet. He sat at the edge of the bed, boots in his hands. He had put them on every morning during the war without thinking. Now, even tying the laces felt heavy. His wife stood in the doorway. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. He didn't answer. She stepped closer. "You don't have to go out today." Something in her voice, careful, fragile, made his chest tighten. "I have to," he said. "Why?" He opened his mouth. No answer came. Outside, the town moved like a stranger pretending to be familiar. Men laughed outside a cafe. A bicycle bell rang. Life continued without asking his permission. He walked past the old recruiting office. The posters were gone now. torn down. Faded outlines where promises once hung. Honor, duty, return as a hero. He stopped walking. His breathing grew shallow. Hero. The word felt like a lie pressed against his throat. At the edge of town, there was a river. He hadn't been there since before the war. The water moved slowly, patiently, like it had all the time in the world. He stood on the bank, staring down. The thoughts came quietly. You're tired. You've done enough. You don't belong here anymore. He imagined the silence beneath the surface. No orders, no memories, no faces waking him at night. Just stillness. For the first time since the war ended, the idea of rest felt tempting. He took one step closer. A sound interrupted him. Footsteps. He turned. An old man stood a short distance away, fishing rod in hand. They didn't speak. The man nodded once, then looked back at the water, as if this was just another normal moment in his day. That small, ordinary presence shattered the spell. He stepped back from the edge, heart pounding violently now, not with fear, but with shame. What was he doing? What would be left behind? He returned home shaking. His wife saw his face and knew instantly something was wrong. She didn't ask questions. She didn't lecture. She simply wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, he resisted, his body stiff, unsure how to accept comfort. Then he broke. He collapsed against her, shoulders heaving, breath ragged, sobs tearing out of him like something long trapped. I can't do this anymore, he said between gasps. I don't know how to live here. She held him tighter. Then we'll learn, she whispered. Together. That night, he admitted the truth, out loud. I think about ending it, he said, staring at the floor. The words felt poisonous leaving his mouth, but also relieving. She didn't pull away. She didn't look afraid. She reached for his hand. Thank you for telling me, she said. No one had ever thanked him for honesty before. The next day, he stood in front of a small building on the edge of town. A sign hung crookedly, Veterans Assistance Office. He hesitated. Turning back felt easier. Going inside felt like admitting defeat. But defeat, he realized, was pretending he was fine. He opened the door. The room smelled of old paper and coffee. A woman looked up and smiled. Not brightly, not falsely, just gently. How can we help you? She asked. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then he said the hardest words of his life. I survived the war, but I don't think I survived coming home. This was not healing. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall he had built around his pain. And for the first time since 1945, he felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, but possibility. The room was smaller than he expected. One table, 2 chairs, a window with thin curtains that let in just enough light to remind you the world still existed. He sat stiffly, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. This wasn't a battlefield. There were no enemies, no orders, and yet he felt more exposed here than he ever had under fire. The woman across from him didn't rush. She waited. Silence stretched between them. Not the kind of silence filled with explosions or screams, but the kind that forces you to hear yourself. You don't have to start at the beginning, she said gently. Start wherever the pain is loudest. His jaw tightened. Pain wasn't loud. Pain was a constant hum he had learned to live with. But then, without warning, a memory surfaced. A smell, wet earth, burning oil, blood. His hands began to tremble. I don't sleep, he said finally. When I close my eyes, I'm back there. She nodded, as if she had heard this many times before. What do you see? He swallowed. Faces. Young faces. Some wearing his uniform, some not. I see them looking at me, he whispered, like they're asking something I can't give. His breathing quickened. The room blurred. Suddenly, he wasn't sitting in a chair anymore. He was crouched behind rubble, gunfire cracking, someone screaming his name, someone else screaming for their mother. His heart slammed against his ribs. He gripped the arms of the chair. "I can hear them," he said, voice breaking. "They don't stop." "Look at me," she said calmly. He didn't. "Look at me," she repeated, firmer now. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. She was still there. The room was still there. "You're safe," she said. "You're here, not there." His body didn't believe her, but a part of him wanted to. Minutes passed, then hours. Words spilled out, clumsy, fragmented, unfinished. Moments he had buried deep. The boy who died holding a photograph. The order he followed that still haunted him. The day he realized survival felt like theft. He spoke of guilt, of rage, of the strange emptiness that followed him home. "I lived," he said bitterly, "and I don't know why." She didn't answer that question. Instead, she said something unexpected. "Surviving doesn't require justification." The words hit him harder than any accusation ever had. When the session ended, he felt drained, exposed, raw, but lighter, just slightly, like opening a wound that had festered too long. Outside, the air felt different, sharper, real. He noticed things he hadn't in years. The sound of footsteps, the warmth of the sun, the fact that his hands had stopped shaking. That night, the nightmares came again, but something changed. This time, when he woke up screaming, he remembered the woman's voice. "You're here, not there." He repeated it aloud, again and again, until the room stopped spinning. Healing didn't arrive as relief. It arrived as exhaustion, as honesty, as admitting that the war hadn't ended in 1945. The Veterans Center didn't look heroic. No flags, no medals on the walls, just worn chairs, chipped mugs, and men who carried the war in their posture. He hesitated at the door. Every instinct told him to turn back. Groups were dangerous. Groups reminded him of units, and units reminded him of who didn't come back. But he stepped inside anyway. There were 5 men in the room, different ages, different uniforms once, but the same eyes. Eyes that flinched at sudden sounds. Eyes that scanned exits without realizing it. No one asked his name. No one asked where he served. That, strangely, made it easier. He sat down. Silence filled the space. Not awkward silence. Familiar silence. The kind soldiers learned to live inside. After a while, one man spoke. "I still count footsteps," he said quietly, "even in my sleep." Another nodded. "I still eat like someone's going to take my food." A third chuckled once. Short, humorless. "I can't sit with my back to a door." No explanations followed. No one asked why. They already knew. When it was his turn, his mouth went dry. He hadn't planned to speak, but something about the room, about being seen without being judged, broke his defenses. "I don't feel like I'm allowed to be alive," he said. The words hung heavy in the air. No gasps, no shock, just understanding. An older man across from him met his eyes. "None of us do," he said. "That's why we're here." They talked for hours, not in long speeches, in fragments, a smell, a sound, a moment that never left. One man described waking up swinging his fists. Another admitted he avoided mirrors, couldn't recognize the man staring back. They spoke of shame, of anger, of the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who didn't know what it cost to come home. At one point, laughter broke out, soft, unexpected, a joke about army food, about boots that never fit right. The laughter felt dangerous at first, like betrayal. Then it felt necessary, like breathing after holding it too long. Outside, evening had fallen. The men stood together, unsure how to say goodbye. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. They simply nodded, a silent promise. "You're not alone." Walking home, he felt something shift. Not happiness, not peace, but connection. For years, he had believed his pain isolated him, that it made him different, broken. Now he understood something crucial. The war hadn't shattered him alone. It had shattered many, and surviving didn't mean carrying it by himself forever. That night, when sleep came, it came lighter. The dreams were still there, but now, when he woke, he could picture the faces of the men in that room, still breathing, still fighting, still here. The war had taken his unit, but in its place, slowly, painfully, brotherhood was returning. Home was supposed to be safe. That was the lie everyone believed. For him, home felt like unfamiliar territory, full of invisible traps and unspoken rules. He stood in the doorway of the living room, unsure where to place himself. His children sat quietly on the floor, pretending to play. Pretending. They kept glancing at him when they thought he wasn't looking, watching his hands, listening to his breathing. He noticed it, the way his son froze when he raised his voice, even slightly, the way his daughter flinched when a plate shattered in the kitchen. He hated himself for it. He had never laid a hand on them, but the war lived in his body, in his sudden movements, in his eyes that were always searching for danger. Dinner was the hardest. The clink of cutlery sounded too much like shell fragments hitting stone. The smell of cooked meat twisted into something else entirely. He pushed his plate away. "I'm not hungry," he muttered. His wife said nothing, but her silence carried weight. She was tired, not of him, but of walking on glass. One evening, his son asked quietly, "Papa, are you angry at us?" The question pierced deeper than any memory. He knelt down, hands shaking. "No," he said quickly. "Never." "Then why do you look like that?" the boy asked. He had no answer. How do you explain war to a child without passing the war on to them? The house learned his moods, when to stay quiet, when to stay away. That knowledge crushed him. He had fought to protect this family, and now he was the thing they feared. The breaking moment came one night, a sudden thunderstorm, a sharp crack of lightning. He dropped to the floor instantly, heart racing, shouting orders that didn't belong in a living room. His children screamed. His wife rushed to them. "Stop," she cried. "It's over. You're home." Her voice snapped through the fog. He looked up, saw terror on faces that should have known only safety. The shame was unbearable. Later, alone in the dark, he sat with his back against the wall. He pressed his fists to his eyes. "I'm poisoning them," he whispered. For the first time, he considered leaving, not out of anger, out of love. Maybe they'd be better without him. The next day, his wife sat beside him. She spoke carefully, like someone defusing a bomb. "We can't keep pretending this will fix itself," she said. "We need help, together." He expected blame, accusation. Instead, he heard something else. Commitment. They went to therapy as a family. It was awkward, painful. The children drew pictures instead of speaking. Explosions appeared in the margins of houses, dark clouds above stick figures. He couldn't look at them at first. When he finally did, his chest ached. This was the war he never meant to bring home. Healing didn't happen in a moment, but something changed. He started warning them when he felt overwhelmed. The children learned his signals, not fear, communication. One evening, his daughter took his hand. "It's okay if you're scared," she said. "We get scared too." He almost broke again, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from relief. The war was still inside him, but now the family wasn't facing it from opposite sides. They were facing it together. The war had ended, but the world had no patience for those still fighting it inside themselves. He stood in line outside the factory gates with other men, younger men, stronger men, men whose hands didn't shake when a whistle blew. The paper in his hand listed his service, years of survival, years of obedience, years of sacrifice. None of it mattered. The supervisor barely glanced at him. "You're slow," the man said flatly. "We need people who can keep up." He nodded. He didn't argue. Soldiers learn quickly when they are unwanted. This happened again and again. Construction site, warehouse, rail yard, always the same polite rejection. Or worse, suspicion. You were in the army? Someone asked once. Best not to bring war trouble here, as if the war were a disease he might spread. At home, he stopped mentioning interviews, stopped mentioning hope. His wife noticed. She always noticed, but she didn't push. They had learned that pressure only made the cracks wider. Without work, time became dangerous. Too much silence, too many memories. He walked the streets for hours just to avoid sitting still. He watched men laugh outside cafes, watched trains arrive and leave, watched life rebuild itself without him. Every brick laid felt like proof he was no longer needed. One afternoon, a former neighbor recognized him. "Didn't you fight?" the man asked casually. "Yes." The neighbor shrugged. "Strange. You don't look like a hero." The words followed him home. "You don't look like a hero." He stared at himself in the mirror that night. Hollow eyes, older than his years. If he wasn't a soldier anymore, what was he? Money grew tight. They sold small things first, a watch, extra clothes, then bigger things, furniture, memories disguised as objects. Each sale felt like another retreat. One evening, his son asked, "Why don't you go to work like other fathers?" He smiled weakly. "I'm trying." The lie tasted bitter. The worst moment came when the letter arrived. Government stamp. Official words. "Your service is acknowledged. No further assistance available." Acknowledged, as if the war were a receipt, as if survival were enough. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with the others. Proof that he had existed. That night, the old thoughts returned. Louder this time. "You're useless. You're a burden. The war took everything, but you still remain." He sat alone in the kitchen long after everyone slept. The house creaked softly around him. For the first time since therapy began, he skipped a session the next day, then another. Avoidance felt easier than disappointment. At the Veterans Center, an empty chair waited. At home, tension grew again. The fragile balance they had built began to tilt. The peace he was trying to learn how to live in was rejecting him too. He had survived bullets, cold, hunger, fear, but this quiet erasure, this feeling of being unnecessary, it was a different kind of war, and he didn't know how to fight it. The world had moved on. He had not. For decades he had carried the war inside him. Not the battles, not the soldiers, not even the explosions. It was the weight of memory, of ghosts, of mistakes he never made but still felt responsible for. The mornings were worst. He woke before the sun, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. The house was quiet. The streets were quiet. Even the birds seemed afraid to sing. He walked slowly to the park bench, dragging the shadows of his own guilt behind him. Every step a reminder that the world had forgotten him. Children ran past, laughing. Their innocence burned like a torch in his eyes. He wanted to warn them, to tell them that the world was cruel, that safety was an illusion. But he did not speak. He had learned long ago that words were meaningless. A stray dog approached. It sniffed him and sat beside him. For a moment, the dog's presence was warmth. A companion who didn't judge. He patted its head. It leaned in, trusting, and for a brief heartbeat, he remembered what it was like to be alive. Memories came crashing. The thunder of artillery, the screams, the faces of men who died while he survived, the families torn apart by his absence, and the silence that followed. He pulled a notebook from his coat pocket. Inside were letters he had never sent, apologies to friends, confessions to strangers, stories of survival he could never share aloud. He wrote one more line, trembling. "I am here, and I remember, and I forgive myself at last." At dusk, the shadows stretched longer. The city lights flickered on. The air smelled of smoke, bread and rain. He closed the notebook, laid it beside him on the bench, and for the first time he allowed himself to simply breathe. Not relief, not joy, just presence. The war had ended decades ago. The peace he had longed for was incomplete. But in that quiet moment, sitting alone in a world that had survived without him, he found something. Not victory, not heroism, not closure, just life. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The bench remained empty long after he rose and walked away. A lone figure against the fading light. A man who survived bullets, horrors, and memory itself. A man who lived and endured while the world moved on.